Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have another highly requested remaster, the Kraken. For those of you that don't know, the Kraken was released a while ago, the original video I mean, in which I used a modded version of Swashbuckler Rogue, as this was prior to patch 8, in order to make a kind of Eldritch, pirate, like something inspired by a literal Kraken, but the idea is that they were a pirate who had somehow taken on the powers of an Eldritch being and became known across the seas of Faerun as the Kraken by, using tentacle-based powers and dark magic alongside the typical swashbuckling panache of a pirate. And honestly, the concept was received extremely well. However, the execution was a little bit iffy, as of course it was a modded build that used a modded class. However, now with patch 8, we have an official Swashbuckler Rogue, which comes with some unique differations from both the original tabletop version and the modded version that I've used, but does somewhat change up the build. I'll be honest, a lot of things are kind of similar. The main thing that changes here is the leveling scheme and some options we get to take because of that. Otherwise, the equipment is fairly similar with some slight adjustments here and there, but for the most part it is a bit similar to the old one. In fact, you could even take the old leveling scheme, and while you would have a slightly different build, it would still work quite well. And I will kind of explain the differences between taking each version's kind of leveling scheme as we go, to kind of give you an idea of what you could play. So I would say that the old video is still relevant, which is why this is a remaster and not a remake, as I do differentiate the two, but I would say that I'm going to present today this new leveling scheme and kind of, go over my decisions as to why I would, choose what I've chosen, and to show how effective this build can be compared to the original, or you can still use the original just with the new official class. But anyways, that's going to be enough from me. Let's get to it. First up, we are going to be a rogue at level 1. Any build that I make that involves rogue, I do like to start with level 1 of rogue, because it just gives us so many more skill proficiencies that I really like to have on most of my builds. So, by kicking things off as rogue, we're going to gain access to pretty much everything we need. We're going to gain access to long swords, rapiers, short swords. This build does use rapiers, which works for us, as well as light armor proficiency, which again, we are going to be using in this build, so we're not really missing out on anything by using rogue to start. For the race today, I have gone with a half-elf drow. This is just a nod to the original, because I wanted to make them a drow, but obviously regular drow can't have beards, so I decided to make him a half-elf, and obviously there is some design inspiration from you-know-who here, I'm sure most of you can guess, but of course this does give us some benefits that actually do synergize with the build. First off, we do get Civil Militia, which gives us access to a few other things as far as weapon proficiencies go, which is nice, including shields, which could be pretty useful if you want to use a shield on this build, but it's not necessary. You're going to gain Dark Vision and Fey Ancestry, all the usual stuff, but I always like Fey Ancestry on kind of like my Eldritch builds, because again, having resistance to being charmed kind of makes sense when it comes to the lore and such like that. But because we are a drow half-elf, we are also going to gain access to a few cantrips and spells throughout the build. We get Dancing Lights at level 1, not great, but it is there. For the background, I went with Outlander, because this is kind of the closest thing to the sailor background. Basically, it's going to be like us basically living out in the wilds and such like that. For us, that's the sea. Not really there wasn't really another one that I felt like 100% fit, lore-wise, but, you could go for things like Urchin, Criminal, all that sort of thing, if you want to go for, like, some of the more useful skill proficiencies, but I felt like Athletics and Survival still fit this build, Athletics kind of being a stand-in for Acrobatics here, as well as Survival just being a great, like, wilderness exploration skill, which I feel like any good pirate really should have, in my opinion, so overall, I kind of like Outlander here, but really, you can switch it up. Moving on to our ability scores, pretty standard charisma spread here. 17 in charisma, as we are going to be using a half feat to bump this up later. We've got dexterity at 16 because I really want this build to have high AC. I want to be dodging things, not necessarily tanking them. We've also got our constitution at 14. Now this build does use concentration based spells a little bit for battlefield control, and as part of a group that's going to work absolutely fine with this amount of constitution. However, in my solo testing, I did find that it was a little bit trickier to maintain our concentration when we were just kind of fighting everything ourselves, so that's why when we get to the equipment section, I'll talk about some things that you can use to circumvent that, but otherwise, no matter what you go for, this stat spread should work. You will have a couple of extra points to put in a dump stat of your choosing. I went with Wisdom, but honestly, it can be any of them. But yeah, that is it for the ability scores. Let's have a look at the skill proficiencies. Again, pretty standard spread here. We've got our Athletics and Survival, aforementioned. We also have sleight of hand and stealth, which I've not put our expertise into. Again, when I think of like people with like eldritch powers, I always think about like charming effects and being able to manipulate those around you. So I decided to lean into that by giving our expertise to intimidation and persuasion. We've left out deception and performance here because the half feat that we're going to be taking later is the active feat, which is going to bump up our charisma and give us expertise in deception and performance. So we will have expertise in all 4 charisma skills, as well as a decent chunk of sleight of hand and stealth by the time this build is done. So you're still going to feel like a rogue, but you're going to be a very charismatic rogue, which is what Swashbuckler is all about. Right, that's level 1. Right, as we hit level 2 here, I do need to talk about what I think is this build's greatest weakness, and that is the leveling progression. Because in reality, you kind of want to get both multi-class options done as quick as possible. Because obviously we're going for a rogue warlock here. But the thing is we really want stuff from Warlock, and we really want stuff from Rogue. I feel like after taking your first level of Rogue, if you really want to get into the power building aspect of things, you're definitely going to want to go for the Warlock stuff first, to kind of build up your kit. So the leveling scheme I'm going to show here is going to be a way to kind of like balance getting both things at like what I would feel like a kind of natural points throughout the game. But honestly, it really is going to be picking and choosing if you want to go straight for the Swashbuckler stuff first, because that's the kind of feel like you're going for the pirate, that's what you want. Or you want to lean into the Eldritch stuff first. And I do believe a mix of leveling, kind of going back and forth throughout the build, is going to be the best way to get all of your abilities at least a reasonable point in the game, but it's up to you kind of how you go about it. So, I'm going to multi-class into Warlock straight away here, because this is going to give us access to a lot of things that we want. No matter what, I would always recommend taking Warlock at level 2, because again, you want the dialogue options, you want the basic abilities that we get from that, etc, etc. This means we're going to gain access to a couple of cantrips, and I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it here. We are kind of power building today. We are going with Eldritch Blast and Booming Blade. Now, the identity of the original Kraken build came from a mix of thunder and, you know, and psychic damage. You know, basically, again, that eldritch kind of power over people's minds, as well as the raging thunders of the sea. And it was kind of a fun, unique mix of the two. And so Booming Blade on this build just fits way too well. It's an amazing power option. It makes this build feel incredibly strong, especially when mixed with things like sneak attack, as well as it feels like it fits the theme, and it's going to synergize with some stuff we're going to be doing later. Now, Eldritch Blast, of course, is a powerful ranged option, and pirates were known for having, you know, like flintlock pistols and such like that. That's kind of an iconic part of the OG pirate kind of look, and I feel like Eldritch Blast is a fun way to use the concept that we're going for as a substitute for that. This is essentially our Eldritch Blaster. It is our gun. It is like a way to get powerful ranged attacks. Now, the original build did use crossbows, and you absolutely can use crossbows on this build if you want. Again, they will work with our sneak attack, which feels very, very fun to use. So if you want to skip Eldritch Blast on this build, go ahead. But as much as I like to avoid Eldritch Blast because it is the common pick, I did actually want to give it a try on this build just to see how I felt about it. And yeah, it feels pretty good, but feel free to use crossbows if you want. I would say you do have room to put a free feat in this build as well, so you could throw Sharpshooter in here as well to replace Eldritch Blast and still have a really powerful ranged option, stack that with Sneak Attack, but otherwise, I just wanted to use Eldritch Blast here for once, because honestly, I don't really do it enough. Moving on to our subclass, of course, we're going with the Great Old One. This is going to give us Mortal Reminder, allowing us to, whenever we roll a critical hit against a creature, they must succeed a Wisdom save or become frightened. This isn't going to come up often in this build, as I've not really built for critical hits, but of course you can equip the usual equipment and maybe take Spell Sniper if you do want to go for like Eldritch Blast crit fishing here, but otherwise you don't really need to. But we also do gain access to a couple of spells here, and I quite like picking up Hex and Dissonant Whispers. Dissonant Whispers is kind of like the quintessential psychic damage spell, other than something like Vicious Mockery. It allows you to potentially frighten people, giving them disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, deals a solid amount of psychic damage, and just feels very good to use overall. Combining that with Hex, basically marking a target for a duel, shall we say, allowing you to deal extra necrotic damage against them and giving them disadvantage on an ability of their choosing, which, overall, the ability's disadvantage isn't actually that useful, as it doesn't affect saving throws. However, that extra necrotic damage is always going to be nice, so we're going to grab that here. At Warlock level 2, we're going to be able to pick up some unique stuff. I would say we're going to grab another spell here, that being Tasha's Hideous Laughter, our other Great Old One spell, because again, when people stare into the eyes of Cthulhu, it tends to drive them mad, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter is a great example of that. We're also going to gain access to 2 Eldritch Invocations of our choice. Now personally, I will be going for Agonizing Blast here, as we are using Eldritch Blast, but again, you want to change that up, you don't need to take this here. Otherwise, the second option is really up to you. Armour or Shadows could be useful if you want to go for robes instead of light armor. Beast Speech is always great for, you know, roleplay aspects and such like that. Beguiling Influence we don't need on this build, but if you wanted to drop Actor, maybe use some Malefic powers and such like that instead. I mean, maybe there's room for this somewhere, but you don't really need it. Devil Sight, obviously good in most situations, and is what I use for testing, because as a drow we do get darkness later on, so we might as well take it as to be able to use it in a pinch. But the other ones all do have kind of interesting options available to them, so feel free to choose. We also do get Fairy Fire at this level if we are a drow, so that's just another option for us with our limited spellcasting. It's nice to get some extra racial spells. Nothing for our subrace, and you can replace the spell if you want to. At Warlock level 3, this is quite important. We get level 2 spells, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, because there's actually so many spells that I would take here that there isn't really enough room for all of them. First up, Arms of Hadar, a necrotic damage spell that allows you to deal damage in range. Now, as you can see here, it's got like some tentacles coming out of the person's chest, which you think must make it a must-have for this build, but honestly, the animations don't really reflect that really well in-game, so I decided to leave it behind here, but it is an option if you want it. Shatter, big powerful thunder spell, again, fits the theme of the build, but maybe not the best option with our limited spellcasting across many different encounters. I don't know, kind of up to you on that one. Shadowblade. Now, obviously, this is a recent addition. Now, you can think a shadowy psychic short sword makes a lot of sense for this build, but honestly, I didn't really like it here. Having to use one of our limited Warlock spell slots just to get our main weapon didn't exactly feel great, even if you did some short rest shenanigans at the start before combat, but that's still using one of our short rests. And at the same time, there's quite a few enemies in the late game that are resistant to psychic damage, especially things like Steel Watchers, and I just kind of like the idea of using actual weapons more than Shadowblade here, so even though this could technically be the power building option that is, in quotations, the strongest, especially with things like the Resonance Stone, I just didn't really like it on this build, so I've decided to leave it behind. Which leaves us with a few more things. I really like Misty Step on this build, being able to literally summon a bit of fog and then step through it feels very much like something an Eldritch Pirate would do, but we can get this in other ways. Mirror Image, another great spell that feels right in hand. Invisibility, Hold Person, really, really good. Detect Thoughts is good, but you can get this from things like items that you can just equip and unequip Disco Elysium style, so I don't think it's really necessary to pick here. Darkness, obviously, we could use to great effect, but we do get a once per long rest usage from it as a drow, and I don't just want to do darkness stuff, so we're not going to take that here. So, of course, we're grabbing Crown of Madness. Crown of Madness is awesome for this build. Again, it fits the theme great. Again, making our enemies mad. That's, again, the whole Cthulian, Lovecraftian, Eldritch thing. We definitely want to grab Crown of Madness on this build. It's a great concentration option for us. It's going to allow us to get some battlefield control on an enemy, and, of course, just fits the theme of the build. But, of course, as I've just illustrated, there is so much you could take here, so really, it's a pick-your-favorite type situation. Now, on to the Pact Boon. Now, obviously, for this build, we are going to be going with Pact of the Blade. It synergizes great with the Swashbuckler Rogue stuff, allowing us to attack with our Charisma, which is going to be a great synergizing opportunity to go with things like the, dirty tricks that we get from Swashbuckler, our sneak attack, etc., etc. However, there is room for Pact of the Tome here if you want to have Vicious Mockery as an action as well. Combine that with Dirty Trick, Vicious Mockery as a bonus action, but it is going to be a fun little combo. And I will say, actually, the ability to use Vicious Mockery as a bonus action after using Eldritch Blast as a main action makes us a very effective ranged character, and it's honestly kind of hilarious. Pact of the Chain, it's a shame we can't really summon a parrot as a familiar, because otherwise this would be mandatory, but unfortunately we cannot, so we're going to stick with Pact of the Blade today. At Warlock level 4, we're actually going to jump back over to Rogue at this point. Well, no. This is again where it gets tricky. I would have originally kind of gone back to Rogue here and started building up to the the 4th level of Rogue. I do think we want to round out our Charisma first, so let me get back into it, sorry. First up, at 4th level of Warlock, we're going to get our another cantrip. Again, we're kind of a psychic character, so I like picking up either Friends or Mage Hand here. Friends would be great with our expertise across everything to really get advantage on charisma checks and just basically dominate any social encounter we come across. Of course, this is a bit more risky in things like Tactician and Honor mode, so choose wisely, but hey, I feel like it makes sense to take it here. Otherwise, I would take Mage Hand instead to give us a kind of minor telekinesis. Moving on to our spells, again, we do get another level 2 option here, and I've kind of gone over each of the ones that I would personally pick, so I'm going to pick from one of them. I mean, Enthrall also works. God, there's so many. Hell, Phantasmal Force also works, kind of, but I don't think it fits as well in this build. I think I'm going to go with Shatter, but otherwise, choose something else if you want. Next up, we get to choose our feat. Oh, we also get Darkness at this level, don't forget. But we also do get to choose our first feats of the build, and as I said, we're going to go with Actor to round out our expertise in all our charisma skills, as well as bump up our charisma to an 18, which is going to help out the whole build. Now again, you could go to Warlock level 5 here and pick up that extra attack from Pact of the Blade, which is obviously going to feel really, really good. So if you want to take that here, you absolutely can. You also gain a level 3 spell at this level, which I would say Hunger of Hadar is an absolute must. Hunger of Hadar giving us access to cold and acid damage, summoning a dark abyssal pit. I don't know, it just feels like it makes sense for the build. We also do get another Eldritch Invocation at this point, and there's not really too many I would take here. I would say Beast Speech, if you don't have it already, does feel pretty good on this build, so we can grab that here. Now, we're definitely going back to Rogue, as we really don't need any of the later Warlock stuff yet, so let's grab some Rogue stuff. We're going to get our cunning actions, allowing us to dash, hide, and disengage as a bonus action. Dashing can feel pretty damn good on this build if you decide to use the Line Breaker boots from the original video, but otherwise, you can use any of these pretty interchangeably. Now finally, at level 3 of Rogue, we get to choose our Swashbuckler subclass. This is going to give us access to fancy footwork. Targets can't make opportunity attacks against you if you attack them first with a melee attack. Feels pretty good to use overall, especially when combined with something like Evard's Black Tentacles, which we'll be able to get later on in the build, or Hunger of Hadar, to basically attack people, move away, and leave them in your battlefield control area without really having any consequences against you, which is really nice. We're also going to gain access to Rakish Audacity, giving us a bonus to our initiative rolls, which scales with our rogue level. And we no longer need advantage to trigger sneak attack as long as you are within a certain distance of the target and don't have disadvantage. So basically we're going to be able to get off our sneak attacks way more consistently, especially in one-on-one fights, which is why this build works much better as a group than solo, because if everybody's ganging up on you, it ain't going to go so well. And then finally, at Rogue level 4, we're going to gain access to the Dirty Tricks. This is where the modded version / tabletop version really differs from the BG3 version. But Dirty Tricks allow us to do a few different things that really make the build come together. So let's talk about them. First off, we gain access to Dirty Trick Flick of the Wrist. Flick of the Wrist is going to allow us to potentially disarm our target and gain advantage on our next attack. It's funny that since even though we don't technically need advantage to be able to sneak attack with Swashbuckler, all of these still give us advantage. I don't know, just thought it was pretty funny. But we do get to potentially disarm our target, which can be really, really nice, and we can attack as a bonus action, which feels amazing. So this really does fit the build quite nicely. Moving on to our next attack, we have Dirty Trick Vicious Mockery. Again, cast as a bonus action and allows us to insult a creature, dealing a bit of psychic damage and giving them disadvantage on their next attack roll, as well as giving us advantage on our next attack. So it's a slight upgrade from the normal Vicious Mockery. Overall, very, very fun to use. You can basically always use this with a bonus action if you want to, so it feels pretty damn potent. Again, combining this at range as well with Eldritch Blast into Vicious Mockery as a bonus action just feels so good to use in combat, so you can be really, really effective at range, like I said. We also have, finally, Dirty Trick Pocket Sand. This allows us to toss a handful of sand at the enemy and possibly blind them, dealing a bit of bludgeoning damage in the process. Again, very, very fun ability, and blinding them obviously is great for us, so I would say this is probably the one that we're going to use the least. I think Vicious Mockery is the one that we're going to use the most, but all of them are pretty damn good. We're also going to get another feat at this level, and at this point, let's max out our charisma. Right, so this is where the build starts to diverge from the original. In the original, it was a 5-7 split, 7 in Rogue, 5 in Warlock. This is because I wanted higher sneak attack damage as well as things like uncanny dodge and evasion to make us way more tanky. But in this variant, I've gone for a 4-8 split instead. Because if we go for a 4-8 split, not only do we get 3 feats, we also gain access to more Warlock spellcasting, which again feels pretty good when we're casting things like Hunger and Hadar, Evard's Black Tentacles. Again, it felt like a way to make this build feel a bit more Eldritch. However, when I was doing my solo testing, like I said, I definitely felt that loss in defense from the higher level rogue features. So really, you do have to weigh your options. Do you want to be a more melee-focused Swashbuckler, in which case go for higher levels in Rogue, 7-5 split once again. Do you want to be a bit more spellcastery, then go for 8 levels in Warlock instead. Honestly, it's up to you, which is again why I said the level scheme from the original build still works here, so it's a pick your poison. Otherwise, I would say Warlock is what I'm going to be going with here, because I felt like it was still pretty effective. At level 6 we are going to get Entropic Ward. As a reaction we can impose disadvantage on an attack roll against us, and if they miss, we do gain advantage on our next attack roll against them. This is usable once per short rest, so honestly it's not great, but it almost does feel like a Swashbuckler ability, so I kind of like including it here, again, because it is kind of like again, we're playing an Eldritch Swashbuckler. This feels right. As a flavor ability, it's impeccable. As an actual ability, it's kinda meh, but we take what we can get. Moving on to our spells, we do get to choose another level 3 spell here, and of course we're going to be going with Fear. How can I not? Again, fear of the unknown is what the Eldritch is all about, so if we can't inflict fear, what exactly are we doing here? Warlock level 7, we're going to gain access to level 4 spells, and of course we're going to be choosing Evard's Black Tentacles here. Literally, we're summoning up Kraken Tentacles to be able to grab onto our enemies, preventing their movement, and turning the terrain into difficult terrain, potentially smothering them, dealing extra damage, and basically getting them stuck. Honestly, it's a really fun spell, so I'm happy to have it here, because I never really take it very often. We also do gain access to another Eldritch Invocation here, and we do have a couple that work. Book of Ancient Secrets will give you a couple of extra spells per long rest, but none of them are ones that I would really use, so I think we'll skip this one here. Dreadful Word allows us to cast Confusion with a Warlock spell slot, Confusion being a pretty, accurate spell for us to take here, allowing us to confuse a group of creatures, so honestly, this is the one I'm going to take. And then finally, at Warlock level 8, the final level of the build, we do get to choose another level 4 spell. It's entirely up to you what you want to take here. I say we've pretty much got everything that I would take. Hypnotic Pattern obviously works as well. We could take that if we like, and if the aforementioned spells that I've already talked about, all of them work. Really, it's entirely up to you. Pick your favourite here. I'll probably go with Hypnotic Pattern though. And we also do get to choose our final feat of the build, and I'll go over the kind of options you can grab here as kind of like bonus picks. In my testing, I did bump up Dexterity to 18 for more AC, and I did find that to be pretty beneficial, so that's what I would personally recommend. However, Defensive Duelist, obviously an option, although I don't think it comes up very often. It doesn't seem to trigger a lot, so I personally wouldn't recommend it, but obviously it does feel at home flavor-wise. There's things like Sharpshooter, like I said, if you want to go down the crossbow route. Lucky feels very good on this build. You could also go for Mobile if you want, that also works quite nicely. You could go for Savage Attacker, Skilled, Spell Sniper, Tough, Warcaster. Especially Warcaster can kind of help with, that concentration aspect. You've got a lot of stuff you could go for here, but I'm taking the simple route and bumping up our dex. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty potent kind of spellcaster melee ranged mix. You do a little bit of everything. You're able to get off powerful ranged attack combos using things like Dirty Trick, Vicious Mockery, and Eldritch Blast. You're able to do powerful melee strikes thanks to our Pact of the Blade extra attack combined with our Rakish Audacity and Booming Blade. Or our Rakish Sneak Attack, I should say, and you can even attack as a bonus action in a lot of cases, so honestly, you've got a lot of offensive power, but you also come with a bit of battlefield control. Things like Arms of Hadar and Evard's Black Tentacles, Fear, Confusion, Hypnotic Pattern. You're going to be able to Crown of Madness. You're basically just going to be able to lock down a couple of enemies on the battlefield, take them out with your impressive offensive onslaught, and then, be able to escape quite easily thanks to your abilities to remove attacks of opportunity against you, etc, etc. However, the biggest weakness, there is a couple of weaknesses of this build. If you get hit or you take on too much aggro, you're going to find yourself going down a bit quickly if you get a bit unlucky with your dodge rolls. Obviously, there is the fact that we do have limited spell slots. They recover on a short rest, but it can make the usage of consistent spellcasting a little bit bad, especially if you do lose your concentration, which shouldn't happen as much in group fights, but in my solo testing, it was a bit of a consistent issue. And also, I would say the leveling scheme obviously being the biggest one. You want stuff from level 4 of Rogue, or at least, and you want stuff from level 5 of Warlock at least, so basically as early as possible, so you really do have to pick and choose exactly which kind of fantasy you want to achieve first. Do you want to achieve the Eldritch Warlock or the Swashbuckler Rogue first? Really, you do have to pick, and that is a bit of a shame. But otherwise, when the build is all said and done, it comes together absolutely beautifully, and it's a lovely combination of everything you would want kind of from a rakish, charismatic pirate build. Again, we have expertise in all charisma skills, and still have a bit of that dexterity, sneaky rogue stuff on the side. So overall, I do think the build works great in all aspects of play. It's just, you have to get there. Luckily, as the face of the party, you're going to have your social stuff really early on, because no matter what, you're taking actor as your first feed of the build. So really, you are going to come online fairly quickly, at least in that aspect, and you will still be powerful. You're basically either just going to be playing a Warlock with a Rogue dip, or a Rogue with a Warlock dip for those first few levels. So really, you just got to pick and choose what you want to prioritize first. But once you've done that, you're good to go. So let's talk about the equipment. Now, as I said, the equipment in this case is not that different from the original build. In fact, I only changed maybe a couple of things from the original. So let's talk about it. First up is the Diadem of Arcane Synergy as our headpiece. Whenever we inflict a condition, we gain Arcane Synergy for 2 rounds. Arcane Synergy allows us to add our spellcasting ability modifier to our weapon attacks. Very, very common piece of kit. Basically, it's just going to give us a massive boost whenever we inflict a status condition, which Fear we can do quite consistently, knocking people prone with hideous laughter, turning people mad. All of this stuff, blindness from, all of this, the Vicious Mockery status effect also works. We're basically going to constantly have this up. It's a free extra bit of power. However, if you want to go less on the offensive and get a bit more utility in the late game, pick up the Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant. You'll get a bit of extra movement speed through momentum thanks to our high charisma at the start of combat, which can help our Swashbuckler Rogue move around and disengage a bit easier, but it also gives you advantage on concentration saving throws, allowing you to maintain our powerful spells like Hunger and Hadar and Black Tentacles a lot easier. So I would definitely say the Gibbous is a solid alternative pick if you don't mind losing a bit of offensive power. Moving on, we do have a cloak in this build compared to the last one where we didn't. We are bringing the Nymph Cloak here to allow us to use Dominate Person, because why the hell not? It makes sense for the build. We're also going to be keeping the same armor from the original build here. I've gone for the Elegant Studded Leather, giving us a +2 bonus to our initiative rolls, stacking this with our Swashbuckler Rogue feature and our decent dexterity. We're pretty much always going to go first in combat, which is amazing. It also gives us advantage on stealth checks, which we have proficiency on, so we're going to be able to hide pretty easily if we need to. And finally, a usage of shield once per long rest. I like to flavor it more as kind of a rapier parry that you see in pirate sword fights, but otherwise a once per short rest reaction based boost to our armor class is going to come in pretty clutch if we really don't want to take a big sword swinging down on us from a steel watcher. I have a thing against steel watchers. As for the alternative armor choice, of course the bolus armor exists if you want to go down a slightly more evil route, making all enemies vulnerable to piercing damage that you do, and because we're using a rapier, you're going to be doing quite a lot of it. And also you still gain that +2 bonus to initiative rolls, so it feels pretty damn good. For the early game, I know I'm suggesting this a lot lately, but this is still from the original video, and I honestly couldn't think of anything else that I felt fit very well. But since we are playing as a drow to start, I do feel like the Spider Silk armor works. It's obtainable really early and easily in the game. That was phrased poorly, but you get the point. And it gives us a +1 bonus to stealth checks, as well as advantage on constitution saving throws. So again, if we do get some concentration options a little bit earlier on, we can maintain them with ease. So really, the Spider Silk armor is slowly becoming one of my best early game options to recommend for most builds. I'll try not to recommend it too often, in case people want to use multiple of my builds at once, but otherwise, I still think it's a pretty decent option for this build that I would recommend most of the time. Moving on to the gloves. It's the Gloves of Belligerence, guys. I mean, what else am I going to say? This is also a holdover from the original build, and allows us to use our thunder damage that we're dealing with things like Booming Blade, Reverberation, etc., to inflict Reverberation upon a target. Reverberation is going to make it so they have a penalty against Strength, Dexterity, and Constitution saving throws. per remaining turn. So as long as we keep inflicting them with reverberation, they're going to have a harder time with their physical saving throws, which means they have a harder time escaping things like Evard's Black Tentacle. So actually it does synergize pretty well with the theme of the build. We get to use our thunder damage a bit better, as well as keep people entrapped in our battlefield control. So it works. Combining this with the Disintegrating Nightwalkers as well. This is a change from the original build. In the original build, I recommended the Boots of Stormy Clamor and the Limebreaker boots as a potential option, but I really like the Disintegrating Nightwalkers here a bit more. It allows us to be prevented from being enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and we cannot slip in grease or ice. Unfortunately, this does not count being trapped by Evard's Black Tentacles, as it's listed as its own unique thing. You're not actually being ensnared, so it doesn't work there, but Misty Step can still get us out of it if we need to, and it gets us out of situations in a pinch where we can't disengage for whatever reason. And again, I wanted to use Misty Step on this build somehow, so this is one way of getting it. In the early game as well, you can also combine this with the Amulet of Misty Step to have 2 Misty Steps per short rest, which should pretty much be all you need. That's the same as using it as just our regular Warlock spell slots anyway, since we would only have 2, so, you know, it works. Speaking of amulets, though, we also have the Strange Tendril Amulet, giving us access to Evard's Black Tentacles once per long rest without having to use a spell slot. So even if you decide to go with the Rogue route, going for level 7 in Rogue, which means you wouldn't normally get the Black Tentacles, you can still get them through this amulet, so that is still an option for you. We also have the Ring of Mental Inhibition, another change from the original build. Whenever a foe fails a saving throw against one of your spells or actions, they gain mental fatigue for 2 turns. This is basically the same as Reverberation, except it affects mental saving throws, so Wisdom, Intelligence, and Charisma, and does psychic damage instead of thunder when you build up enough stacks. So we can build up mental fatigue and Reverberation at the same time to make everyone's saving throws absolutely abysmal and continue to deal extra damage, which feels amazing. It makes this build impeccable at support, especially for your allies, so that they can go in and use their important spell effects and such like that without having to worry about the enemy even making their saving throw. So combining the Gloves of Belligerent Skies with the Ring of Mental Inhibition just feels amazing to use. Finally, the Strange Conduit Ring. This just adds extra psychic damage to all of our weapon attacks while we're concentrating on a spell, so it's basically free extra damage for us. Now, for the weapons. In the early game, pick up the Sword of Screams. It's just a basic rapier that does up extra 1d4 of psychic damage. Can be obtained pretty damn early on, so it feels pretty good on this build. But of course, in the late game, you're gonna grab the Duelist Prerogative. This is literally the Pirate's Rapier. There's no way I could not include it here. By using the Duelist Prerogative, you're going to gain a +3 legendary melee weapon that comes with a built-in d4 of necrotic damage. While it's in your main hand, you gain Elegant Duelist. As long as your offhand is empty, you score a critical hit when rolling a 19 or less. So obviously this synergizes with things like Mortal Reminder, and again, if you wanted to slap something like the Deadshot Bow, which also further reduces this, and maybe some other stuff as well, you can really stack up that critical hit chance. And also, you gain an additional reaction per turn. So that's a reaction for Shield, that's a reaction for Rakish Audacity, that's a reaction for a bunch of things. So honestly, it works pretty well. We also gain Withering Cut. On a hit with a melee weapon, you can use a reaction to deal additional necrotic damage equal to your proficiency bonus. So even if you don't have anything else to spend that reaction on, you can still just use it for more damage. We're going to get challenged to a duel, allowing us to challenge an enemy to attack only us, inflicting bleeding on the target, so it's a little bit of a status effect. And we can also pull an enemy in to have a one-on-one duel with, while our allies take care of the rest, which again, we thrive in one-on-one situations. And of course, Duelist Enthusiasm. As a bonus action, we just get to attack, once per turn. It's pretty damn good. It just gives us an extra option if there's nothing else we can really do with our bonus action on our turn, although we do have quite a lot of options, so that you won't be using this as much as before perhaps, but it's still incredibly solid. I mean, you guys all know what the Duelist Prerogative is. It is the best weapon for rogues in the game, in my opinion, so, you know, we might as well use it. But yeah, overall that is the build itself. I'll quickly go over the cosmetic stuff, as I actually forgot to in my previous couple of videos, and I did get a couple of questions about it. First up, we're wearing a fish. I don't know why the icon's a fish, it just is. But it's called the Leather Jacket and Ruffled Shirt, and this is all from the Fear Tailor's Camp Clothing mod. It's one of the most popular mods on the in-game mod manager, available on all platforms, so anyone can use it. But yeah, we get the Leather Jacket and Ruffled Shirt thing, giving us this kind of roguish pirate look, combined with the leather boots too. In the hat slot here, we have the Silly Hat, which I somewhat disagree is silly. I mean, I think it looks rather dapper. We get kind of this like pirate with a feather thing, kind of reminds me of Captain Hook from Peter Pan, so overall I feel like it just kind of gets this like kind of dark kind of Eldritch pirate look that still has a bit of finesse and flair and panache. I think it looks quite nice. We have the armor and boots here, covered in the Horde dye from the Faerunian Colors mod, again, available on all platforms, but the hat itself is colored in the vanilla, black and azure dye to get the overall look you see here. And I actually do like the normal armor look as well. I do think it also fits the build quite well, but if you want to look more like a kind of classic pirate, I feel like this modded option works quite well. But yes, that is the build, and overall the general consensus is it's damn good. I would say that it does a lot of things in all aspects of play really, really well, and you're going to feel like a solid, fun, main character type person while you play this build, and it has a decent lore option to go into either good or evil playthroughs, really up to you if you want to kind of be a pirate with a heart of gold, or if you want to really lean into the madness and Eldritch aspect and go evil, you can do both. Also, this build obviously does synergize with the Illithid powers quite well. Again, that psychic stuff, so if you wanted to include them here, you could, but I obviously chose not to. So really, it's entirely up to you kind of how you want to go with this build. I feel like there's a lot of room for adaptation and growth. Like I say, you could go with the original level scheme as well, if you really want to change things up and be a bit more of a tanky kind of roguish pirate. Again, really up to you. But yeah, I feel like this build turned out pretty well. It was kind of interesting to revisit the concept and kind of give you guys a newer take on it with the new official subclass rather than the old one. So I would definitely watch the old video again if you would want to get a better idea of how the old level split worked and how the kind of tankiness came into play there with things like I said, like uncanny dodge and invasion, as well as the higher sneak attack damage. So really, pick your poison on this build it how you want to, with little adjustments here and there, and you're going to come out with something pretty goddamn solid. Like I said though, it does suffer from the fact that the leveling progression is a little bit awkward, as well as if you do kind of go into it with solo testing in mind, it is going to struggle, as opposed to working in a group where you can kind of separate enemies and like make things a bit more, well, make things a bit easier for you, I guess. But yeah, I think that's going to do it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.